In 2016, thousands of non-believers gathered at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. for this event that you see on the screen called the Reason Rally. Now, as human beings made in the image of God, we possess reason, and that is a glorious thing. I praise God that He made us rational creatures. But this event was not designed to come together and celebrate the fact that we have glorious reason. Instead, this event was to celebrate secularism and to promote secularism in the public square. There are two photographs here on this slide, and I wanted to show you these. These are actual photographs from the event, but I wanted to show you these to give you an idea of the kind of atmosphere that was there and the ideology that the attendees there were advocating for. If you look at the photograph on the left, there's a woman holding a sign that says, "Let's have a moment of science." Okay, very obviously echoing the "let's have a moment of silence" that is often said to give people an opportunity to pray. On the right, you see a young man wearing a t-shirt that says, "Atheists, in science we trust." And then there's a little cross with a red slash through it down there at the bottom of his shirt. So what are these signs communicating about the ideas of this crowd when it comes to human reason and faith, or human reason and the claims of Christianity? I think it's pretty clear from looking at their slogans that their idea, their conviction, is that those two things are diametrically opposed to one another. That there is no such thing as being a reasonable person of faith or a Christian who has good reasoning skills. I want to read you a quick blurb from their website that tells a little bit about what their mission is as an organized body of secularists. The goal of the Reason Rally was to showcase the presence and power of the non-religious voting bloc and to demand that reason be put at the forefront of our public and political discourse. We are excited and empowered, and we give attendees the message to take back home and apply at the local and state levels. Not only do we celebrate our secular, atheist, agnostic, humanist, free-thinking, and non-religious identities, we are prepared to exercise our power at the voting box to bring sense back to government. Okay? So they're very clear about their agenda. This is a slide that you can, a website that you can connect to through the American Humanist Association. And the title of the website is Kids Without God. Now there's some fine print down there at the bottom of the webpage, and I want to read that to you. This is their slogan. "Welcome to Kids Without God, a site for the millions of young people around the world who have embraced science, rejected superstition, and are dedicated to being good without a God." And it has all sorts of neat little games and informational trivia type things on the website that even small children can go through and learn about how to be good without a God, how to reject religious belief, and how to embrace science. Now, I show you these things not because this represents a majority of American culture, because it does not. It represents a very small segment of American culture. However, it's a segment that is very vocal, and it's a segment that is having a quickly growing influence on our culture in subtle ways that influence many of us, and we don't even realize it. I teach a graduate level course at Houston Baptist University on the topic of science and faith, and we started classes this past Tuesday. I have 10 students in my class, ranging in age from 20s all the way up to almost 70 years old. It's a great, diverse group of students, and I can already tell that they're absolutely brilliant, and it's going to be a huge blessing for me to be their professor throughout this semester. At the beginning of the course, one thing I asked them to do is to introduce themselves and explain to the class what interested them in a course on science and faith. And here's what really surprised me this semester. 40% of my students told in their introduction that when they reached university, they walked away from their faith. And all of this 40% contingent of my class said the reason they walked away from their faith was because they started learning science at the university level. And they were told by professors and peers that good science was incompatible with religious belief. Now, I knew this in theory, that this is the kind of thing that went on, but to meet these students and hear their gut-wrenching accounts of walking away from the Lord and then in later years coming back, and how eager they were to learn about how do I reconcile science with faith? How do I have science and faith conversations with my non-believing family, my non-believing friends, or future professors if they go on to another graduate program in a non-Christian institution? So I love that I'm able to share that real life story with you just to give you a sense of the urgency and the importance of this topic. When we talk about scientific apologetics, what exactly do we mean? I think that there's a lot of misconception about what it is we want to do when we do apologetics using the scientific disciplines. So I wanted to give you some kind of nutshell definitions of scientific apologetics, and I'd like for you to write these down, those of you who are note takers, and I'll mention that on these slides that I think are particularly important to you. In your program, you should have a blank notes page for this presentation that'll give you plenty of space. First of all, when we do scientific apologetics, we're helping the skeptic overcome science-related philosophical obstacles that prevent them from seriously considering the gospel. Please note the words that I've highlighted in yellow there. Science-related philosophical obstacles. Second, we're offering them objective scientific evidence in support of philosophical arguments for the existence of God. I want you to notice what that does not say. It does not say we're offering them scientific proof of the existence of God, because that isn't possible. What we can do is we can look into the natural sciences and we can take evidence from top-notch research and we can apply that to philosophical arguments for the existence of God. In other words, the scientific evidence can lend support to a philosophical argument that we're making for the existence of God. This is a gentleman named Sam Harris. You may have heard of him before. He's classified under that label, New Atheist, that you may have heard. He is a neuroscientist who penned an essay several years ago called The Politics of Ignorance. This essay was written in response to some things going on in a presidential campaign, at which point a candidate came forward and used the phrase intelligent design when he was asked what he believed about the origin of life. So Sam Harris does this op-ed essay called The Politics of Ignorance, and I want to give you a little snippet of what he said. It is time that scientists and other public intellectuals observed that the contest between faith and reason is zero-sum. Okay, do you know what that phrase zero-sum means? Thank you. I love the honesty. A zero-sum contest is when you have one side gaining and the other side goes down in response to the gain of the other. Does that make sense? So you can't have one side gaining and one side staying the same. You can't have two sides gaining. So what Harris is arguing is when reason is valued and emphasized, faith decreases. Okay? It's a zero-sum game. Kind of like one of those old-fashioned balances. When you put something on one side, the other side goes up. Okay, zero-sum game. This is another new atheist, Dr. Jerry Coyne. He's an evolutionary biologist, and he has a book out. I believe this came out in early 2016, and the title of the book is Faith versus Fact: Why Science and Religion Are Incompatible. And here's an excerpt from his book. By relying on faith rather than evidence, religion renders itself incapable of finding truth. Faith rather than evidence. He also says, science is but one form of rationality, philosophy and mathematics are others, but it is a highly developed form and the only one capable of describing and understanding reality. In other words, science is the only thing that can give us truth about the real world. You may recognize Dr. Richard Dawkins, evolutionary biologist, author of many books, New York Times best-selling author, speaker at the Reasons Rally in Washington, D.C. And here's what he says. Faith is a state of mind that leads people to believe something, it doesn't matter what, in the total absence of supporting evidence. It is a kind of mental illness. Okay, notice what he's saying. In the total absence of supporting evidence. All right, so we've looked at the Reasons Rally folks. We've looked at the Secular Humanist website for children. We've looked at some quotes from 3 new atheists who are also highly credentialed scientists. Let's boil down their words to a few essential claims. First of all, religious faith is the opposite of reason. Therefore, it is incompatible with science. Claim 2, science has a monopoly on truth. It is the only way to understand anything about the real world. And claim number 3, scientific observations of the material world do not and cannot imply the existence of God. Now, what I want you to notice about all 3 of these claims from high-ranking scientists is that not a single one of these claims is scientific. Not a single one. All 3 of these claims are philosophical. And guess what? None of the 3 scientists I quoted have training in philosophy. Not a single one. What you're seeing in their worldview is a philosophy known as scientism. Scientism. This is well worth making note of. And in a nutshell, scientism is a worldview that says scientific methods, weighing and measuring and observing and calculating, are the only way to gain objective knowledge about the world. Okay? This is a worldview that is steadily becoming more prevalent, particularly in the academy, but we're seeing it elsewhere as well. And here, you can boil it down to this statement: if science can't demonstrate it to be true, then whatever it is cannot be known to be true. Okay? Get that? If science can't show it, we don't have a reason to believe it. But there are some problems that are inherent to this philosophy. And please write these down as well. Because when you get into a conversation with a skeptic and you have realized through their words to you that they are espousing this worldview of scientism, then these are the things that you're going to need to gently and graciously pull out of your thinking cap. Number one, as a philosophy, scientism is self-refuting. Okay, remember that statement that I just showed you? If science can't show it to be true, then we have no reason to believe that it's true. We can't know that it's true. But that statement itself can't be proven through the methods of science because it's a philosophical statement. So they've refuted their own worldview by stating it verbally. Okay, so that's problem number one. Problem number two is scientism dismisses from the outset the possibility of science pointing beyond its own realm. Okay, pointing beyond the material world that it investigates. So scientism is a philosophical bias that's not supported by science itself. It's a bias that is brought to observations in the natural sciences. And finally, scientism cannot account for some essentials of human experience. And an example I would give of that is objective morality. It's one of the things that scientism cannot explain for us. We can't get right and wrong in a test tube in the laboratory. But yet you would probably be hard-pressed to find someone espousing scientism who is willing to say there's no such thing as good and evil. They are out there, but you'll be hard-pressed to find one in your day-to-day conversations. Naturalism is kind of this overarching worldview or philosophy that's behind the advocate of scientism. And naturalism, very basically, I'm boiling this down very simply, says that nature's all there is. There's nothing that transcends the material world, including but not limited to God. So no such thing as God, angels, demons, the immaterial human soul. None of those things can possibly be real because all that's real are the material things that make up the universe. So with all of that said, the point that I want to make to you is what we're dealing with really isn't a battle between science and religion, okay? Because all of those arguments that we've looked at so far, they're not scientific arguments, okay? They're arguments against religion, but they aren't scientific arguments. What we really have is a conflict between the worldview of naturalism and theism, the existence of God. This is a philosophical conflict, and often science is drug in to try to support the case against theism. But the point I want to drive home to you is that you cannot scientifically argue against the existence of God. The most you can do is use science in a philosophical argument. Okay, I know I'm kind of nailing that over and over and over, but I really want you to get that this is not science versus religion. This is not science versus the existence of God. This is a philosophical battle through and through. So what's our mission, okay? We know that this is a philosophical thing. We want to be able to use that in our communications with skeptics or with Christians who are having doubts as a result of being exposed to higher level sciences, for example. What do we need to do? Okay, here's my personal mission statement when it comes to scientific apologetics. Using what I call a mere creation approach, demonstrate that there is objective scientific evidence that offers positive implications for the existence of God and negative implications for naturalism. Once again, notice the word I'm not using in this mission statement. I am not using the word prove. I'm talking about evidence that offers positive implications and negative implications. Okay, good. Everybody tracking with me? What do I mean by mere creation approach? What does that mean? A lot of you are probably familiar with C.S. Lewis's most famous work, Mere Christianity. And in Mere Christianity, as you know, his objective is to talk about the core tenets of the Christian faith that all of Christianity has to come together and be unified on. And he recommends not getting bogged down in conversations with non-believers about the secondary issues of theology. So using that as inspiration, what I mean by the mere creation approach, and let me just, before I even show you my definition, let me make it clear that I'm not saying this is the only good approach. I'm saying I think this is a really wise approach when you're dealing with a non-believer specifically, because it gets you on common ground with them, and it gets the conversation rolling without getting to a stalemate within the first 5 minutes. Okay, and as we go along, I think that you'll get the spirit of this approach. So first of all, the mere creation approach makes a case for the mindful creation of the world using well-established scientific data. So we're going to make a case philosophically, but we're going to use well-established scientific data to support that philosophical case. Now, here's kind of the trademark of this approach, if you will. It bypasses the sacred cows of evolutionary common descent and the age of the earth. And I want to reiterate here, those are really important conversations. Theologically, we need to wrestle with things like whether or not there's any credibility to evolutionary theory. That's important. The age of the earth question, that's really important. But in this particular approach with the skeptic, I think it's quite effective to begin your dialogue with them by putting those issues aside temporarily and focusing on the mere creation aspects of the Christian claim to divine design. And lastly, the mere creation approach shows why theism is a better explanation for the natural world than naturalism. Okay, so that's just a brief little outline there for you of the approach. Okay, so, all right, so that's all the geeky philosophy stuff. And now I want to just give you one example argument that I believe falls well within this mere creation approach. This is a philosophical argument, but we're going to talk about the scientific data that supports this argument for the existence of a creator God. Here's Richard again. I love Richard Dawkins, and I'll tell you why. He gives me so much material to use. And if I could get a hold of his mailing address, honest to goodness, I'd send him a thank you card because he's so helpful. I don't know what I would do without Richard Dawkins. Here's Richard Dawkins' claim about the nature of our universe. He says, the universe that we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at bottom no design, no purpose, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. Okay? So he's saying we look out at the cosmos, there's nothing there whatsoever to convince anyone that there is mind or design behind what we're looking at. Is he right? That's the question that I want to answer for the rest of this presentation. When we talk about fine-tuning of the universe, that's actually not at all a controversial claim, okay? Well-established science. So let me give you, again, a very simplified definition of what we mean when we say the fine-tuning of the universe. Fine-tuning says that the constants and quantities, which I'll define in a moment, the constants and quantities that characterize nature must fall within an extraordinarily narrow range in order for the universe to be life-permitting, okay? So the constants and quantities must fall within a teeny tiny range if there is to be any life anywhere of any kind in our universe. What do we mean by the constants and quantities of nature? The answer to this is pretty complex. Simplifying, boiling it down, here's a nutshell definition for you. The constants and quantities of nature are numbers that when we plug them into the equations that describe the laws of nature, they determine the physical attributes of the universe. Okay, I know that's a mouthful, and it's a little bit of a scary definition, so I'm going to give you an illustration of this. Okay, physics class. Does anyone remember learning Newtonian physics in high school or college? Fun stuff. Okay, so what you're looking at here is an equation for Newton's law of gravity. Okay, so the capital F in this equation is representative of gravitational force. That's why it's an F, okay? On the right side of the equation, we have a capital G, which I'll talk about last. To the right of the G, we have M1 and M2. M1 is the mass of one of the objects in question, and M2 is the mass of the second object in question. In our illustration here, the apple falling from the tree is one object, and planet Earth is the second object, okay? Now, the R on the bottom of that equation is the distance between the apple that has come loose from the tree and planet Earth or the ground. So if we theoretically knew the mass of the apple and the mass of planet Earth, we could calculate the gravitational force as long as we know the distance between the apple and planet Earth, so long as we know what G is. Now, the cool thing is G stands for something called the gravitational constant. Remember I said constants and quantities that we plug into the laws of nature? Okay, this capital G is one of those things, and it's called the gravitational constant. So if we can plug in all of our measurements and then put in the gravitational constant, which is the reason it's called a constant is because it is a constant number. It's always going to be the same number you're plugging in there for G. Then we can find the gravitational force happening between the apple and planet Earth. Okay, so everybody got it? Okay, now here's the remarkable thing. The gravitational constant, that number that's always the same when you're plugging it into that equation to find out the gravitational force between the two objects, is very, very finely tuned for the existence of life in our universe. If the gravitational constant were off by 1 part in 10 to the 100th power, I mean, we're talking about a fraction, 1 over 10 to the 100th power, an infinitesimally small fraction. There would be no galaxies, no stars, no planets, and ultimately there would be no life in the universe. Now, just to put that in perspective, some estimates for the number of particles in the observable universe is only 10 to the 80th. So look how much larger, exponentially larger, this number is on the bottom part of our fraction. 1 part in 10 to the 100. Just that much deviation in the value of the gravitational constant, and there would be nothing here to support life in the universe. Okay, here's another example of a fine-tuned parameter. The expansion rate of the universe. Okay, it's governed by something known as the cosmological constant. Again, another number that plugs into these equations. If you do not already know this, our universe is not static. It's not staying the same size. Since its beginning, it has been in a state of expansion. And this cosmological constant is what governs the rate at which the universe is blowing up, blowing outwards, expanding into the great beyond. The cosmological constant is even more finely tuned than that gravitational constant. Finely tuned to 1 part in 10 to the 120th power. Here are a couple of other examples. We have the strong nuclear force constant. Okay, that's just a fancy phrase, which means the degree of strength with which protons and neutrons stick together in the nucleus of an atom. Next, the electromagnetic force constant. This governs the degree to which the nucleus of an atom holds on to its orbital electrons. And finally, the mass density of the universe, which is kind of self-explanatory, the amount of material stuff in the universe compared to the spatial dimensions of the universe. So, all of that said, I've given you some examples. I've explained what fine tuning is and explained what these constants and quantities are that are finely tuned for the existence of life. A very, very conservative estimate by cosmologists and astrophysicists of how many constants and quantities are so finely tuned for the existence of life in our universe is 35. So we're not talking about just 1, 2, 3, or 4, but 35 different constants and quantities that have to be just right, like the Goldilocks zone. You know what I'm saying? Not too hot, not too cold, but just right for there to be life in our universe. And if there were tiny, like unimaginably tiny deviations in any of these values, there would be no life of any kind at any time, anywhere in the universe. You recognize this guy? The great Stephen Hawking, probably the most famous living scientist of our time. He's a theoretical physicist and cosmologist. I hope that you've read some of his material. He's an engaging writer. He really is. And I wanted to give you a quote of his that I find very telling. He says, "The remarkable fact is that the values of these numbers, meaning the constants and quantities, seem to have been very finely adjusted to make possible the development of life." Dr. Stephen Hawking is an atheist, but he's making this admission. It seems like they're very finely tuned in order for life to have developed in our universe. In his book, I think this is his most recent book, I don't think he's had anything come out since then, The Grand Design, this is what he says: "The laws of nature form a system that is extremely fine-tuned. Our universe and its laws appear to have a design that is both tailor-made to support us, and if we are to exist, leaves little room for alteration." So he's very clear. And remember what I said, this idea of fine-tuning, it isn't controversial. Okay, it's well-established science. This is Freeman Dyson. He is so adorable. Every time I see that picture, I just want to hug him. Okay, so Freeman Dyson, theoretical physicist and mathematician. He is, if you haven't heard of him, you really should look him up. He's theoretical physicist and mathematician. He's known for his work in quantum electrodynamics, astronomy, and nuclear engineering. And he says, "The more I examine the universe, and the details of its architecture, the more evidence I find that the universe, in some sense, must have known we were coming. How do we account for this extraordinary state of affairs? There are three options. Number one, the universe could be fine-tuned by necessity, okay? This is a philosophical term that we use when we want to say things could not have been otherwise. It is not possible for things to have been any other way. So the idea is, because of the laws of nature that we have, things were going to turn out this way. There just isn't a logical alternative. The second option is chance. When the Big Bang happened, it was just by sheer chance of how all that went down that things rolled out the way they did, and look, we're here, and isn't that lucky? And the third option is design. Things were intended to be this way. We were meant to be here. Let's go through these one by one. Necessity. Could it be that there's no other option but a universe like the one we observe? There are problems with that idea, recognized problems with this idea. First of all, the laws of physics, and I showed you a simple one earlier with the gravitational force, the laws of physics are consistent with a wide range of possible constants and quantities. So you can start switching out those constants and quantities with different numbers, and you can get a coherent theoretical system lots of different ways, which suggests that the constants and quantities could have been different. The laws of nature do not determine them, in other words. Secondly, the constants and quantities, they were determined by the initial conditions of the universe, okay? So in the very, very, very young universe, those conditions are what determined the values of our constants and quantities. There's no such thing as a law of initial conditions. So we just had these particular initial conditions, and we don't have laws to explain why we had those initial conditions. And finally, there simply isn't any evidence whatsoever that necessity is the case. And many scientists, including skeptical scientists, will acknowledge this openly. So what about chance, this second option? Could it be that things just turned out this way by sheer luck? I call this the Lady Gaga explanation, because the idea is the universe was just born this way. It was born this way, and there's no explanation, and life is good, let's carry on. Okay. But there are some really interesting problems with the chance hypothesis. I want to give you an illustration that explains just how faulty this idea of the universe by chance actually is. Okay. So I think this contraption here is called a bingo cage. It's full of ping pong balls, and usually it has a crank on the side, and they turn it, and then a ball with a specific number on it pops out the bottom, and they call it out, D15 or whatever. And if you're lucky enough to have that on your bingo card, you can put a little token or stamp or whatever on your bingo card. So let's imagine that in the grand cosmic lottery, all of those ping pong balls inside of the bingo cage represent possible universes, possible ways things could have been in terms of the constants and quantities of nature, okay? Now, there are billions and billions and billions of these possible universes inside the bingo cage that are represented by plain white ping pong balls, okay? Now, you come in to the bingo game and you purchase 35 ping pong balls to go into this lottery type situation. And every one of your ping pong balls has a red star on it. They dump your 35 ping pong balls in with the billions and billions and billions of other ping pong balls. And they turn the crank, and the first one to pop out has a red star on it. Woohoo, you've won the first round of this lottery situation. Well, then they continue to select ping pong balls. And the first 35 turns of the crank yield all 35 of your ping pong balls with red stars. Now, what are the odds? 35 in a row that are all yours, the ones you needed, among billions and billions and billions of other possibilities. Okay? Chances are pretty slim, right? I mean, that's an understatement. Now, a skeptic will often come back to this and respond, well, every single ping pong ball in this cage is equally improbable. So your argument is flawed because some ping pong ball had to come out, and since they're all equally improbable, it's not remarkable that the ping pong ball with the red star came out. And never mind the 34 subsequent times that the red star ping pong ball came out. But that's a misunderstanding of the argument. The argument is not, oh, we got a highly improbable ping pong ball. The argument is, when you have a scenario with billions and billions and billions of one kind and only 35 of the other kind, it's far more probable that you're gonna get the white plain ping pong ball than one with a star on it. We're looking at this improbability in terms of the two different kinds that are in the cage, not the improbability of each individual one in the cage. Okay, I hope that makes sense to you. Is everybody tracking with me? Okay, good. So we have billions and billions and billions of possible winners, just the right one pops out 35 times in a row. Okay. Can we still save the chance hypothesis? Can we still save it? Well, what do you do when you're entering a lottery and you want to increase your odds of winning? What do you do? Yes, you buy more tickets to increase your odds of winning. So cosmologists know this, and so they have suggested something called the multiverse hypothesis. The idea of which there are actually an infinite number or a near infinite number of worlds out there, and we just happen to be one, and we are the lucky one that just happens to have the constants and quantities needed for the existence of life. Okay, it's just pure luck, and here we are, and we shouldn't be surprised, by the way, because we are here to observe it, and if we weren't here to observe it, then we wouldn't be surprised. Right? Okay? So there are some problems with this multiverse theory. First of all, the theory lacks a plausible model of a universe-making mechanism, like a mechanism to spit out these universes from time immemorial, that would not itself require aspects of fine-tuning. Okay? When we think about such a mechanism, you still run into that fine-tuning problem when you get into the deeper physics. Number two, many cosmologists, regardless of worldview, are skeptical of the existence of other worlds, much less an infinite number of them. Okay? And that's essentially what you have to have in order to make this lottery idea work. There simply is no scientific evidence for the multiverse. And three, a multiverse, like let's just imagine that there is some mechanism out there spitting out universes over and over and over until we have this near infinite number of universes. This could not have been going on for eternity in the past. So the ultimate beginning of a hypothetical multiverse would itself have to be explained. If there was some mechanism out there that's been doing this from eternity and we have an infinite number of, and I won't even get into the philosophy and the problems with the idea of an infinite number of things. You've probably heard Bill Craig talk about that if you follow his work at all. But we've got to explain, well, why did that mechanism exist, and how could we have ever gotten to the birth of our universe if an infinite number of other universes had to be born first? So you just get into some really thick philosophical weeds when you start talking about that. And I don't think that they can be overcome. So our bottom line is that a major motivation for this multiverse hypothesis is philosophical and not scientific, okay? It's a metaphysical idea that's brought to the science to save this theory of a chance universe that permits the existence of life. George Ellis, probably one of the most famous cosmologists of our day, wrote an article in Scientific American magazine. It's available for free online if you want to Google it. This issue came out in August of 2011. And I love what he says in response to proponents of the multiverse theory. He says, the universe might be pure happenstance, it just turned out that way, or things might in some sense be meant to be the way they are. Purpose or intent somehow underlies existence. Sorry about that. Science cannot determine which is the case because these are metaphysical issues. Okay? Famous scientist, famous cosmologist, he says these are not scientific issues. Science cannot tell us one way or the other because this is a philosophical idea that's being brought to cosmology. So remember the question I asked a moment ago, how do we account for this extraordinary state of affairs, the fine-tuning of the universe for life? We looked at necessity, and that just doesn't fly. We looked at chance, that just doesn't seem to fly. Our only alternative is design. That's the only alternative left to us to explain this mind-boggling situation that we find ourselves in. So we can form this in a quick little memorizable argument. Number one, the fine-tuning of the universe is due to either necessity, chance, or design. Fine-tuning is not due to necessity or chance. Therefore, fine-tuning is due to design, okay? So this is our philosophical argument. This is what I've been using throughout the presentation of the science. But what I did is I used the science to support number one and number two, okay? So I did not use science to prove the existence of God. I made a philosophical argument, and I used science to support my argument. I want to recommend a couple of books to you. A Fortunate Universe by Geraint Lewis and Luke Barnes. This is a fabulous book on fine-tuning. It is not an easy read. It is not an academic book, but it's hard work. This book is hard work, but it is very rewarding hard work. What I love about this book is that Geraint Lewis is an atheist and Luke Barnes is a Christian. And this is just fantastic. I can't recommend it enough. If you aren't brave enough to wade into it yet, but you have a science-savvy person in your life that has science and faith objections, this would be an excellent book to give to them. This is an old book, but I'll tell you why I'm recommending it. Anthony Flew was a very, very famous atheist throughout his career. He passed away in 2010. But towards the end of his life, I believe it was in 2007, that he came out and said he had embraced theism, not Christianity, but he had come to believe in the existence of God. And in this book, which is sort of a quasi-interview style, because there was a writer that did this by interviewing Anthony Flew, he goes on to talk about some of the arguments he found very compelling. And one of those arguments was the fine-tuning for the existence of life in our universe. So it's a very fast read, it's very short, and it's very endearing to just peek into the mind of this brilliant man who was brave enough to publicly talk about changing his mind that late in his life. And finally, I have to do a shameless self-plug. So not out until July, but already available for pre-order. And I'm showing you this because my publisher makes me show you this, but also because what I do in this book is I take arguments like the one that I just showed you, along with arguments from other areas of the natural sciences, and also some philosophy of mind, which deals with the existence of the human soul, and also mathematics and what a mathematically intelligible universe tells us about ourselves and tells us about the existence of God. And I make it understandable to the average Joe in the church pew. So it's short, it's just a little over 200 pages, but I just wanted you to have it on your radar if these type of topics appeal to you. I'd like to end with my favorite scientific apologetics verse. This comes from Romans chapter 1, verse 20. For ever since the world was created, people have seen the earth and sky. Through everything God made, they can clearly see his invisible qualities, his eternal power, and his divine nature. So they have no excuse for not knowing God. Thank you.